So yesterday, Pasha talked about speed running in video games, and today we're going to speed run a very important concept in programming, which is objects. For the past few days, I've been talking about the basics of Unreal Engine and what blueprints are, and something pretty essential to what blueprints are is this concept in programming called objects. A lot of languages are what you'd call an object-oriented programming language, which means they heavily involve this concept. So to really get good and understand what's going on in Unreal Engine in your games, it's really crucial to understand what these objects are, because it's going to make you a more efficient game developer and make developing these projects a lot easier. So the first question is, what are objects? And this is a concept in programming for basically logically sorting groups of information and behaviors. The Unreal Engine blueprint, that would make objects out of things like your player or a pawn or an asset in the program. Like if you guys remember the example yesterday, I used a plane above the car, right? And that plane was an object because it had data associated with it, and it also had behaviors or methods associated with it. So I was able to do things like destroy it or detect if it hit something, right? So those are very important behaviors for an object in a game to have. So one of those terms I mentioned earlier are that objects have two very important things: information and behavior. Well, how do we define those behaviors? We define what an object can do by chunks of code called methods. And if you think of objects like that, methods are basically everything that an object can do, what it can act on. So this not only lets you have a pretty logical grouping of, hey, what can this player or weapon or whatever your object is do, but it also allows you to chunk code together so you're not writing repetitive code, because you can call a method in one line. And maybe that method takes up 100 lines of code. So instead of writing 100 lines over and over again, you're only using one line in future method calls. So the second thing that an object involves is data or information, right? And how is that represented in object-oriented programming? Through fields of the class. Don't worry too much about what a class is right now, but for reference, it's the thing that makes an object, right? It's like the blueprint for it. So this data that's relevant to an object, they're stored in these variables called fields. Say that you have a player object. Maybe an important field would be the health of the player, right? Because it's a variable that you have to store and track as a game developer. So, I really hate being taught things and not being really told why it matters, right? It's important to understand why these things matter, especially in game development. Many languages that are used for gaming today, such as Java and C++, utilize object-oriented systems to make sure that the games are designed efficiently and effectively. And that not only matters for the programmers and developers, because you're the ones making and typing the code, but it matters to the users and gamers too, right? I think somebody was talking on the Discord or the Zoom the other day about Arc. I think a few of you are familiar with Arc, maybe not. But somebody was talking about how poorly it was optimized or how hard it was to optimize. If you use a lot of repetitive code or you don't program well, there's the risk of your program not being well optimized, which might mean that some people can't play it because they don't have the hardware to play it, or it's a really sucky game because it's running at 5 FPS, even if you have like a 3080 or something. So all of these things with designing your code effectively and cleanly through object-oriented programming is not only important to you as the game developer, but the user. So let's have an example of an object in a game, right? Just so you guys can really understand it. Let's say one that you use in Unreal Engine or a lot of other games, really basic, is a player object, right? Well, there's information that you have to store about the player and behaviors that you have to store about the player as a game designer. So maybe some of this data includes, what your inventory looks like, or how many lives you have, or your current health or currency in the game. And there are different methods that can manipulate that information, such as possibly a heal method that adds to the health field, or a delete inventory or set currency method. So those are behaviors of that object, right? So in this example, you have an object and it has information associated with it and behaviors associated with it. So that makes it really easy to program something like if a player takes damage. You could do something like player.set health and then a lower value, right? Instead of having to type out a whole bunch of repetitive code. Not only does that make it easier for you as the programmer, but it also makes it easier for people reading your code, right? It's very intuitive and easy to understand. So I want to test how well you guys are understanding this. And don't worry if you're not understanding it super well, because this is a very, very quick introduction lesson for something that's more of a complicated topic in programming. But I want to see how you guys understand fields and methods, right? Information, behaviors associated with objects in programming. So let's talk about a weapon object, right? What are some fields, some information that might be important to a game developer to include in a weapon object?
I have one. I think that like the amount in the clip, like the bullets that that weapon object has would be one. I would say like the rate of fire for the whatever the weapon is, the rate of fire, that would be one of them. And let me think. I never thought about it in the weapons case in the for objects class, but yeah, that's all I have so far.
Those are both really great examples. Does anybody else by chance have any?
Would say like
Could be
I have
one.
something.
projectiles, like speed and size.
How it feels, how you're able to use it in every area or situation.
Hmm.
Those are
From
all
the size of the gun's actual hitbox, how much damage it does at a certain velocity.
every
Definitely
single one of
one that
those is
has
a
like
great example because it associates data with this object that are crucial to game development. So those are all great examples. What are some possible, okay, this is going to be the harder question, but what are some possible methods that could be associated with a weapon object?
Let's see.
I'll give you guys a hint. A lot of the times a method of an object manipulates the fields. So maybe think about something that changes one of the fields you listed.
Reloading
the weapon
and
for
Oh
fire.
yeah, we reloading or just shooting, like whoever said that. That's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Reloading or shooting. They would take a bullet out of the chamber or add more into it.
Yeah, and then it changes the field, like the amount you have in the clip or something.
Getting ready
Exactly.
to shoot it with a bolt action.
If you use a bolt action, like a bolt action rifle or something, you need to make sure if it's going to like jam or if the recoil is too strong or if the bullet.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, you can do it by
Accident
rate of fire. If the person's like spamming on their mouse, like if it reaches a certain interval, then the gun would jam. That'd be pretty cool.
That's
Definitely,
also a
yeah,
perfect
that-
example, right?
Far
And
Cry was the
also-
only game to do that.
I'm sorry?
Oh, for real? Far Cry did that? I didn't know.
Yeah, Far Cry 1 did that.
Oh, that's
Yeah, the original Far Cry did do that. Yeah.
But anyways, those are all perfect methods, examples, because they're relating the object itself, manipulating those fields, right? So as a game developer, you're very easily able to type, like weapon.fire, and it contains all of the logic to take a bullet out of the chamber and do everything that you need to for the weapon to actually fire, right? And that only takes one line after you've already written methods. So it's logical and easy to understand, right? It's very intuitive. If you see weapon.fire, you know what that means, right? You don't have to have a whole explanation for it. So obviously, why is this necessary? It logically groups variables and behavior together to keep track of things. And this is really important when you're managing a huge game and you have a whole bunch of different assets, a whole bunch of different characters, enemies, weapons. This helps logically group it and help you build your game. And it not only this, but it reduces the amount of redundant code that you write. So you can contain that code in a method and just call it when you need it, which helps you focus on the things that you really care about designing your game.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Any questions?
How do you call a method within Unreal Engine with blueprints?
So in blueprints, it's a little bit harder, but you can make every object that you have. So like when I put the plane object in yesterday, you see the entire blueprint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that itself runs within the game loop. So there's a single little module that's sending a tick, and you can define a method outside of it and then call that method within that main game tick, the main game loop.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Can you design a game using both blueprints for some aspects and actual like programming and typing it in for others, or do you have to pick one and stick with it?
I believe that they may be exclusive, but if not, it may be that you can use blueprints and C++ together. I'd have to check on that to give you a more confident answer though. Because in the beginning, when you complete your project, you have to choose exclusively one of those things.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I was trying to do like the template for my game or whatever, and when I was trying to do my assets, it said like error, unknown anomaly detected in the software. I have no.
All right, yeah, just DM me on Discord. We can try to work past it and see what the issue is. So I think that's all the time we have today because we're already super late for coach's session. But if you have any questions about this, feel free to DM me on Discord. I'm going to put this presentation in a Google Drive and put that on Discord.